Hey, this is Sam, and before this podcast gets started, I wanted to remind you that we are looking at a book in a few weeks called Originals by Adam Grant, and we realized that we hadn't told you what book we're going to do next, and we always love it when you read along with us and submit your questions. So pick up your copy of Originals by Adam Grant.
Welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, helping people take their leadership to the next level. Brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International.
Well, we are back with another Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, and I'm here with none other than
the one
Richard,
and only.
The one and only.
Good to be with you, Sam.
My favorite Richard Blackaby.
You're my favorite son-in-law.
Oh, well, that's high praise, high praise. I'll try and stay that way.
You moved up from number 2.
Yeah. For those who don't know, he only has one son-in-law. So, yeah. But anyways, it's good to be back, and thank you all for listening, and we're glad to have you with us. This week, we wanted to do something a little bit different. We've I guess maybe it's been a year and a half now that we've been doing this podcast.
Yeah.
60 plus.
Time's flown by.
It has, man. Just in a blink. 60 plus episodes. And we thought it would be good to maybe pause here and look at some of Richard's leadership in the past. What was it that got him into leadership? And so we're going to do that today. And Richard, I'd like to just maybe start by asking what first got you into leadership or interested in leadership? Was there something early on in your life that was like, man, I feel I'm called into leadership, or
yeah.
Or was it a series of events, or maybe just tell us some of how you got started and initially interested in leadership?
It started out, I think, just gradually, but I'm a firstborn child, and there certainly are some stereotypes that come with that. And so at an early age, I just always felt the burden of coming up with stuff for me and my siblings to do. So we'd be sitting around bored, and inevitably I would start thinking of, well, let's play this, let's do that, let's go in the backyard and let's build this. And because I would just, even as a child, you'd be sitting around kind of bored, and it was just amazing to me how people can just sit around and accomplish very little until someone starts leading. And they don't have to be necessarily really dynamic, or they don't have to even see themselves as a leader. Someone steps up and says, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we play that? You be on this side, I'll be on this side. You be this, you have this role. You ride on that tricycle, I'll do this on this scooter. And the next thing you know, like, off you go. And I just began to realize, wow, there's no limit to what we can do and how much we can have fun if, instead of sitting around just being bored or watching TV, all you have to do is start leading, and people respond. And
were you aware of that even at a young age? Saying,
you just start noticing.
I'm being a leader now. Or?
I don't think I necessarily saw myself as a leader. Real leaders, I don't think necessarily see themselves that way. They just start leading. They just fill in a vacuum. And so I've often said, I don't have to be the leader. I've been a committee member. I've served as an employee in years past, and I'm happy to do that as long as I'm working under a leader. As long as someone is leading, I'm happy to follow. I just don't want to waste my time. And so if someone is making good use of my time and saying, hey, Richard, can you do that and do that? And I'm going to get this in place, and I'll take care of that. And you just need to be here and do this. Great. Just tell me what to do. I'm happy to I don't have to be in charge. It's not about me. Like, my self-esteem isn't like dependent upon being the top guy in charge. But if everyone's sitting around and listlessly bored, and an organization is just flatlined, and we've got all kinds of problems and no one is addressing them, then that drives people like me crazy. And so you just start to realize, and even just as a child, you start to realize we were all sitting around bored, and then I came up with an idea. Let's go play this. And for the next hour and a half, we had a blast. And even other kids in the neighborhood came and joined us. And all of a sudden, we've got this epic game going on in our front yard. And only an hour before, everybody in the whole neighborhood was bored. And all of a sudden, it's the happening place. And so growing up, that was often what our house was like. We had an ordinary house, ordinary yard. but almost every evening it was just packed out. And I eventually, as a kid, I started building an ice rink in our backyard because we lived in Canada. You just put a garden hose in the garden, and the next day you had an ice rink. And we would have epic long hockey games just day after day in the backyard until, it was just time to come in and go to bed. And everybody in the neighborhood would come by, and I'd organize teams, and I arranged, the whole rink and the goals. And I just realized life is just so much better when someone leads, when someone just says, look, we could all just, and I've as a kid, we'd show up at a outdoor hockey rink in Canada. There's just these outdoor rinks, they flood, and people show up. And typically when you get there might be like 8 or 9 different little groups, two guys here, 3 people there, shooting pucks against the boards, just skating around, whatever. And no one is doing anything. And so when I would arrive, I'd holler out to everybody, hey, who wants to play a game? And before you knew it, everybody wanted to play a game. And so everybody
no one was stepping up.
We'd gather in the middle. Yeah. I would organize teams. I'd set the rules, and off we'd go, and we'd have an epic game. And I just, my whole life, I just always, everywhere I went, it just seemed like, well, that's fine. Everybody's skating around aimlessly, 2 guys just shooting a puck back and forth to each other. But like, it's more fun to play a game. Everybody wants to do that.
Yeah.
It's just that everybody's sort of waiting for someone else to organize it. And so I'd get it organized, and then I didn't have to be in charge anymore. Like, now we had a game going. And if someone new came along later after the game started, I would just holler, okay, you play on that side. They're short one player or whatever. And I just kind of keep it going. But
it sounds like you had a lot of natural propensity towards leadership.
Sure. For sure I did, and that partly being firstborn, being the oldest of my siblings, and partly just wiring. Some people are just not wired that way. They're not going to step up, and that's fine. But I've discovered that in every social setting, you need some level of leadership, and leadership just makes things better when you lead well. That's what leadership is for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that I think sort of dovetails nicely into my next question is, this is a leadership podcast. You've written a book on leadership. Mm-hmm. You speak on leadership. You are a leader. What is it that you feel like about leadership that makes it such an important thing? And you've touched on it some already, but why is that something that you have just really dedicated a lot of your life to, not just being a good leader, but teaching others to be good leaders?
Well, I'm passionate about it, and my kids for years have just joked about that. I remember my daughter Carrie one time, a pastor friend was coming over, and my kids all knew this pastor. He was a lot of fun. They liked to banter with him when he came to our house. And so my daughter just sort of said, oh, he's coming over, and she kind of gave me this frown and said, you're not just going to talk about leadership, are you? Because my kids just knew that I was passionate about that, and I got around other leaders. We tended to end up talking about that. But there's a couple of reasons why, and partly I guess it's because I've just over the years seen the results of bad leadership or weak leadership, and basically people suffer. People suffer when there's not good leadership. It costs people when people don't lead well. So, for instance, I've known churches that had just floundered for years. Churches sitting in vibrant neighborhoods where they should be reaching all kinds of young people, young families, and seniors, and yet the same handful of 40 people attend that church and have been for the last 30 years. And the buildings run down, and the church just does the same old programming. You think that you've gone through a time warp back into the 1950s because nothing has changed since then. And you look and you think to yourself, this is a whole neighborhood that God intended to have a Christian witness, but it doesn't get that witness because this church just sits there and never penetrates the community, never does anything creative to get out into people's homes and to meet needs and so on. And so this church is just aging out, and one day will probably die because the seniors that were left couldn't afford to keep the facility running. And you look at that and you just say, but it could have been so much more. And sometimes you see a new like maybe the pastor retires or he steps aside finally, and another pastor comes along with a vision, with energy, with creativity, entrepreneurship, and starts trying new things. And before you know it, the church is packed out. And you'd say, well, this church has been here for years. All of a sudden, it's reaching people. People are becoming Christians. youth are getting programming now, and you think, well, what happened? Well, just simply different leadership. And I've seen it with businesses. There's lots and lots of business stories of businesses that just sort of just kind of moped along, just not really doing much, barely making profits, if any. And then all of a sudden they changed management. And beforehand, everybody was making excuses why it's just a real tough market, and people, it must be a recession. People aren't spending money and whatever. And then all of a sudden you get a new person with some new ideas, and all of a sudden it's the hottest item around. And you realize, well, it was never the product. It was just leadership. This business was just really poorly run. And so I've looked at that, and I'd say as well, sometimes the greatest leadership role of all, as we've said before, is parenting. And when parents don't lead their families well, I don't want to put all the blame on parents. Kids obviously make their own choices, but at the same time, I've been around some families where it was obvious there was a lack of leadership, a lack of intervention, a lack of awareness. Things were going on in the kids' lives that the parents were just oblivious to, or they just weren't addressing, or they just were not creatively addressing issues. I've got one way to parent. It's obviously not working on this child, but that's the only way I know how to parent. So that's what they're going to get. And so you watch people suffer because people aren't leading well. And what drives me crazy is when leaders, and we addressed this in a question that was submitted not long ago, but what drives me crazy is when leaders just shrug their shoulders and say, well, I did the best I could, or that's what we've always done. And they just sort of they don't take the responsibility. It's like, well, I tried something and it didn't work, so what else can I do? I call these people bureaucrats, not leaders. Bureaucrats are always just trying to not take any blame. They just stay in their silo and say, hey, this is just my job. This is just what I do. If people don't like it, that's their problem. If things don't get better, it's not my fault. I just did what I was told. I just did what was, what I knew to do, what I've always done. And so, but leaders, that drives them crazy. A real leader does not just hold a position. As I've said many times, real leaders solve problems. And so when there's a problem, a leader tries something. If that doesn't work, they try something else. They bore down on the problem. They analyze the situation. They pray. They seek God's guidance. They do whatever is necessary to finally find an answer, and they stay with it until things are better. And so many times, I guess what's made me so passionate about leadership is I just see a lot of people that are just kind of complacent leaders. They sort of just lope along, but they could be so much better. Yeah. And
it sounds like you really come at this from a problem-solving perspective, and not just maybe, I don't know if there was someone in your life early on that you really looked up to as a leader, as an inspiration, but it's almost more just the lack of that you've seen. There's been this deficiency that has driven you to try to fill that gap.
Of course, I grew up watching my dad, and my dad, certainly was the most influential person in my life growing up, but it's not that he necessarily took me aside all the time and said, son, God's called you to be a leader. Let's talk through leadership issues. A lot of it was just watching him. And so on the positive side, and I've talked about this before, but every job pretty well that my dad came to was in disarray, was with death's door, and he never went to an easy job, an easy position. Sometimes he'd come to a job where there were people actively campaigning for him not to have the job, and people that were opposing him every step of the way. Or things were had declined so much that they weren't even sure they could afford to pay him anymore. But every solitary place he ever left, that place became the happening place. That became where the action was, and everybody wanted to be a part of it. And people were contacting him saying, "Can I come work with you? Because I've always wanted to be a part of something that was so dynamic and exciting." And so I was just on the front row as an oldest son, just watching that. And so I just grew up watching what good leadership could do.
Yeah, the difference that would make.
And then I watched, what bad leadership could do. So, I mean, you could have a really good church that was thriving and doing well. That pastor would move on to his next assignment, and the next pastor would come in and just basically kill the church. And you'd think, well, that was such an exciting church. They had so many good people there. How could one leader come in and just shut things down so dramatically and devastatingly? But and so a lot of it was just observation. I just began to see that that I watched what happened when a good leader showed up, and I watched what happened when a bad leader showed up, and it could be the very same organization. And so I just saw the power of good leadership and the destructive nature of bad. It doesn't take long for a bad leader to unravel even a very good organization. And so that also, again, just makes me so passionate about trying to teach people that. And that's why, for instance, I'll see some pastors, especially, that are great people. I mean, they're just fun people to be around. If you're sick in the hospital, going to have surgery the next morning, you love to have them stop by and pray for you at your bedside. But then you watch them in their church, and the church is getting dated. They've got dated programming. They don't have very many leaders that are emerging. And these guys are just good old boys, that real nice people, but I would call them, they're leading at half-mast.
Yeah.
It's like, look, there's so much more that you could be doing. Like, do I need to light a fire somewhere under you to wake you up? Like, you've got all these possibilities floating around, and people talking about it'd be great to have a youth program, or it'd be great to reach out to this retirement home that's right on the same street as the church. And here's all these possibilities, and here's a whole ethnic group that's in the community that we could reach out to, but they just don't ever do it. They don't follow up. And I just see lots of times these are not bad, evil people. It's just they're just content to just kind of saunter along in life as a leader, and the poor organization is a half of what it could be if only it was led better. And the worst thing, especially for a church, is that there's all kinds of people who could have been ministered to by the church that never are. And same goes for businesses, and employees suffer because they're not led well. So if they'd had a good leader, their business would have been thriving. The employees would have had all kinds of new opportunities to lead and to have new experiences, to grow personally, professionally. But the leader didn't try anything new, didn't grow the organization. So it was just the same old thing year in and year out. And after a while, you start losing employees who are really desperate for a challenge or some growth. And then these poor leaders are wondering why they can't hold on to anybody, why nobody wants to work with us and be a part of our company. And you realize, well, it's because you're not leading. And it's a demoralizing thing to have to work under a non-leader.
For sure. Well, let's take a quick break here.
Hi, this is Richard Blackaby, president of Blackaby Ministries International, and I want to tell you about an exciting opportunity coming up on April 6 to 8 in 2020, where I'll be speaking in a conference on increasing your spiritual influence, and we'll be at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove, just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. If you've never been to that wonderful place, it is just a God-blessed place that Billy Graham established so that people could get away and just be taught from the Word of God and be restored, have their cup filled. I've spoken there many times, and I'm particularly excited about this conference because we're going to be talking about how to increase your influence. And we'll look at perhaps increasing your influence with the younger generation, with your kids and grandkids' ages. How can you have an impact on the youth of today? We'll also talk about culture. Culture is a huge, huge issue today that's greatly impacting young people and people of all ages. How could we not just be influenced by Hollywood, but actually be an influencer for culture? We'll also talk about how to be an influence in the church. A lot of people come to me and say, my church is really struggling, but I don't know that I can make any difference. I'm just a church member. But you can make a difference, and you can make a greater difference if you'll let God show you how. And finally, we'll just talk about influence in the marketplace. Some people say, well, I'm not a pastor, or a missionary, I'm just someone who works in the business world. And yet people are discovering that you can have enormous influence for God's kingdom right there where God placed you. It's going to be an exciting time. We're looking forward to bringing some Blackaby family members to help me out with some of the teaching and ministry. And so if you've never been there before, I encourage you to register soon. We'll have a registration link in the show notes. The housing always fills up, and then people will contact us and say, I tried to register and they don't have any more housing available. So let me encourage you, if you're thinking at all about doing that, go online and secure your place now. And I'll really look forward to spending a couple of days with you in the Blue Ridge Mountains outside of Billy Graham's home. And it's guaranteed you're going to have a wonderful time and a wonderful encounter with God.
So Richard, maybe just one more question before we go today. For you in particular, what would you tell your 20-year-old Richard Blackaby as he was just starting out, maybe that first leadership position that you had, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a great question. Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd probably tell him, look, you got a lot of lean years cheering for those Buffalo Sabres. I'll warn you now.
Well, yeah. Let's go ahead and defect and find a winning
cut
team.
Your losses. That'd be so awesome to do that. And if I could go back and sit down with myself, I would love to mentor that 20-year-old. I would be putting some books in my hands and saying, look, here's some great books. Just get around great people. And my dad kind of did that with me. But I would just say, here's some biographies of people who changed the world. This could be you. God could change the world through you as well. So just get yourself always around influencers like that. But a lot of things also just kind of came intuitively for me, and just by watching others. And it wasn't as systematic as maybe it could have been. I think maybe someone walking with me could have helped me just to have more takeaways as I watch good and bad leadership. And I wish there weren't a lot of leadership books out there back when I was 20. It's now there's a proliferation, but back then there were a few. And I think ultimately I got to most of them. But it would have been great to have someone just put them in my hands and then have someone to talk about them with. But oftentimes leaders they sort of emerge in isolation. They're just kind of feeding their way and trial and error. And so I think I could have saved myself a lot of time if I'd learned some of these lessons sooner. Mm-hmm. And I could have if someone had just helped me to focus and understand what was going on around me. But and so I encourage people, if you are a younger leader especially, I'm not necessarily big on like regular one-on-one mentoring, but hey, when you get around some guy that really has a lot of experience and wisdom, take him to lunch at least. You don't have to meet with them every month or every week, but just get around people and ask lots of questions. If I were 20 and I could talk to me now, but I just would keep asking questions. I would just keep pumping me with, well, what about this? What about that? What would you warn me about this? Or what would you encourage me to do here? And there's so much I think I could have done so much more if I'd just known some of these things sooner. And so, so for our listeners, find some people like that and just and humble yourself enough just to ask, even just, hey, I'm a 20-year-old. What don't I know yet that I need to know? And then just be quiet. Let people tell you. And if you are in a humble posture like that, there's so much you could learn that will save you a lot of time. And if you learn something when you're 20 instead of when you're 40, just think of those 20 years and how much more effective you can be in those 20 years because you learned something early instead of later. It's great if you learn something when you're 60, but then you look back and say, but if I'd only known this 40 years ago, just imagine all the other things I could have done and how many people I could have blessed if I'd only been the kind of leader I could have been many years earlier.
Well, for those who don't have someone to sit down with, we hope that you're taking something away from this podcast, that you are taking your leadership to the next level. Richard, it's been a pleasure to kind of walk down memory lane with you and kind of pick your brain a little bit to see how leadership works. And until next time. Richard, we like to always try and answer as many questions as we can from our listeners, and we have a question here submitted by Braden. He asked, for a young man who attends a faithful Bible-believing church but notices some lacks of leadership in major ways. The church is small, but it's declining in membership, and it's not doing much in the community. This person is very loyal to the church, but is getting very discouraged with what he sees and how things are being run. should this person consider leaving the church or try and stay and speak up and make a difference?
That's a great question. That's often a common issue that many people face. Several things just to say about that. There's stuff we don't know just from the question, but there are a lot of times where you may have found Christ in a smaller church. Maybe you got turned around because you met someone, you got involved in a small church that loved you and led you to God. And, I always feel a certain stewardship of that.
Yeah.
And I feel like if God intercepted my life with this small congregation, then God may have wanted me to be a part of this. He's let me become involved here. And so I feel like I want to do everything I can to give something back, especially to a church where maybe I found salvation, or maybe I found my spouse, or I was baptized or married. Yeah. And so it doesn't mean you have a lifelong commitment there, but you certainly ought to try to do what you can to be a part of giving back to a church and helping it. And so I would say certainly you need to try to talk with leaders, and at least don't just leave. I always tell people, don't just disappear and all of a sudden stop attending. If you really do care about the church, then at least have a sit down with the pastor and let him know, if nothing else, to tell him why you may be leaving. Can I also say this, and this sometimes is hard for some folks to hear, but if you're a small church that is declining and is not penetrating your community, it's usually a leadership issue. I've seen this over and over and over again, where churches don't have to be quite as small as they are. Churches don't have to be declining. Yeah. The reason they're declining is because they failed to make some adjustments to get in their community. They failed to make adjustments to attract maybe younger members. And so they don't have to be declining. They don't even have to be that small. But when he says that there's only the pastor and one other elder in a church of 100 or less, if you've got just that small of a leadership group in a church like that suggests to me that the pastor is not developing leaders. He's not multiplying himself, and of course that's going to lead to decline inevitably. Yeah. So my advice would be, perhaps you're part of the solution. Maybe you're that young leader that church really needs. Yeah. And they haven't been good at cultivating it, and developing you, but at least go and try to be a part of the solution. And perhaps you see some things. Don't just go and say, well, you don't have anything for young adults. You don't have anything for this or that. Go and say, hey, there's nothing right now for my age group, but I'd be willing to try to start something. If you'd be willing to let me, maybe I can start a Bible study. Maybe I can do some kind of outreach. But I'd like to try to at least address the issue. Try to present solutions, not just complaints. But I would also say, if the leader feels threatened, if the leader doesn't want other leaders in the church, he kind of wants to be the leader, then there may come a point where you have to just say, well, I just have to I want to thank you for all that you've done for me and how you've invested in my life. But for me to go to the next level in my Christian walk and in my service, I need to find a place where I can serve. And if God has wired you to be a leader, then you're going to need some outlet to exercise leadership for the Lord, for the church. And Absolutely. So it may mean you have to go, but don't go easily. Yeah. And sometimes I've had
don't go without saying why.
Right. Let them know. And those people need to know. And when you watch talented, young, sincere leaders leaving your church, hopefully that'll be a wake-up call to say, we cannot afford to have people like that leaving. We need to make some adjustments. Yeah. But usually when that's the case, those are usually symptoms of some weaker leadership in the church. And hopefully they're open enough that if you'll come humbly, graciously, offering just to help address some of the problems, you may be actually the answer to their prayer. But take the lead. If you're a leader, step up and lead. And if the church just won't let you, then perhaps that may be a sign that ultimately you need to move on. But at least give it your best shot. And you might be surprised, and you might end up having the opportunity to bring about some very significant changes that bring new life to that church.
Great. Well, thank you, Braden, for the question. And for anyone else who would like to submit questions, podcast@blackaby.org.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, review us on Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. If you have questions or comments, please email us at podcast@blackaby.org.